support throughout. And it's nice to see everyone. What I thought we would do, I see it's 12 noon now. I apologize to everyone who thought that this morning's service was too short, but we really do try to. We know that it's not easy to stay in front of one's computer or TV screen so long. And we also know that we have people who were nervous about being in the temple with a whole lot of people. So we've tried to take all of that into consideration as we've planned our services this Yom Kippur. It does feel nice to be back in the sanctuary. Again, this will go down as one of my stranger Rosh Hashanahs that I have ever had. It does feel much better to be back in town and to be back in temple. And I hope that everyone who is logging in can feel that sense of connection. But one of the advantages of being able to be
I have all the clipboards for you, and then
one of the advantages of being able to log in is that we have folks who are lots of places. So we have some people who haven't made it home yet. We even have some people who moved away and went up north. And yet we still get to feel a connection with them and that they can be a part of our High Holy Day and Shabbats and everything else we do observances. So that leads me to saying Shana Tova to Amy, who I see has logged in. Nice to see you, Amy. What I wanted to do, I asked Bill to I wanted to talk about Israel, what's going on right now, and we're going to open things up for questions. But first, I wanted to just take a few moments and see if there are any questions about Yom Kippur itself, anything that has come up in services, questions about prayers, traditions, melodies, anything on your mind. Let's start with this Yom Kippur observance.
If you didn't get to make amends and make apologies and ask for forgiveness to the right people or any people at all between Rosh Hashanah and this evening, can you put them all in an envelope and slide them under the gates of God's domain after Yom Kippur? Is it still valid, or have I crossed my name out of the book of life? Because the last two Yom Kippurs actually did that, but I got so much stuff going on right now.
I would argue that the gates of forgiveness are always open, and I'm pretty sure there's a clause that says because of hurricanes, you get at least an extra 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure it says that someplace. I am questioning whether High Holy Day should be during hurricane season. I was contacting one of the pastors who from up the street and said, you all might have it right, not having your High Holy Days during hurricane season.
That's why there's a darbet. It gives you a little bit of respite every 4 or 5 years, right?
Not every 3 years. But even when it's pushed back, it's still hurricane season.
Yeah, but not
even though we were in the desert before, but now we're with hurricanes.
Always
we get to play Exodus.
Always something. Other questions, thoughts about Yom Kippur? Let's begin there.
I have a thought and it's a question, and it has bothered me for more years than I can remember. So when, and I love Kol Nidre is my favorite service actually, and Nila, because they bookmark each other. So, you know, anyway, the prayers about what we have sinned and what we've done wrong. And when you know you haven't done those things, I mean, collectively, we're not murderers, right? That's pretty drastic. We haven't killed, you know, the ant that's in the house that is, you know, a fire ant, and you can't just get it. I even take spiders out the door. So I don't say those. I just, something about some of these things, because as we progress as human beings, as we get older, as we become more spiritual, we don't do that stuff. We're not, you know, so why do we have to say it? I mean, I don't say it. I just listen to it because I'm not being honest to myself and God if I say, well, I've done this stuff, but I actually haven't done it.
It's a great question, and you're not the only one who feels that way, I can guarantee. So when we stop and look at the Hebrew, first of all, this entire vidui, this confession, is written in the first person plural. There's a universal theme to Yom Kippur, where we're not just asking for forgiveness for ourselves, or even for ourselves and our family, or even ourselves, our family, our congregation, but we have to think beyond ourselves. We think about the entire world. And by reading this list of sins, of all of these terrible things, yes, thank God, most of them, I hope, don't apply to all of us. But we know that these things are still happening. We know that there are people who are committing murder. We know that there are people who are doing all of these things. And by saying it out loud, we are reminding ourselves that while these things are still happening, we have an obligation to work for their coming to an end. We have a lot of work to do. And so we're reminded at the beginning of the year that there are all kinds of awful things that are happening. Let's see what we can do. First of all, you got to start with ourselves. What can I do to make myself a better person? But at the same time, let's ask ourselves, what can we do to help make our societies better as well? So I think that is why they are there. I'm not saying that that works, but I think that that's the idea behind it. It's not easy to read all of those words. But that's the idea behind it. Someone also explained that, take murder out for a moment, but that, if it were a checklist, or if we asked people to raise their hands for who committed sexual immorality, and asked for a show of hands, that wouldn't go over so well, and that would keep people from admitting their sins because of this fear of public embarrassment, etc. So, but when we all say it together, we are giving those who really need to say those words an opportunity to say that.
But on our introspection of what we have done in the past years, we need to be accountable to ourselves, and the only other entity is accountable to God. For these types of, I don't like the word sin. I'll say human indiscretions that we've done. But for the larger picture of the world, I understand that we're supposed to repair the world, but honestly, the people that are doing all this stuff, they're not saying this. They're not hearing us. They're the ones that should be coming to our services, and they should be in our synagogues, and they should be learning what we do, because we're not those people generally, right? So it's a hard thing.
But let's take murder for an example. Maybe it's a reminder for us that we need to work to reform our gun laws, because we are allowing too many guns to be out there, which is helping to have these murders in our very own community take place. And so again, I agree with you. That the folks who are the worst are often the ones who, aren't exactly paying attention. They don't know anything about Yom Kippur, perhaps. But let's focus on what we can do, and how we can, as you said, participate in Tikkun Olam, the repair of our broken world.
All right. Thanks, Rabbi.
Sure. And again, I know, Amy, that you're not the only one who feels that way. And I think the prayers are supposed to be difficult to read, because, again, the rabbis, they wanted our attention. They want us to really think about what we're doing. And some of the prayers are almost jarring. The whole who shall live and who shall die, which is perhaps the most troubling of all of the sections. Again, it's that last line. It's a reminder that we have this prayer here to remind us that our actions count, and that we do have some control over our lives. We don't have complete control, because we know that accidents happen and bad things happen to good people. But by being the best we can be, we have a chance to live good lives. And then that last line, utshuva utzfilah tzedakah ma'avirin et roa hagazera, a reminder that before everything is written and sealed, by repentance, through prayer, through righteous acts, we have a chance to help control our own destiny a little bit more. There have been times where it's been brought up, we should remove some of these prayers from our liturgy. But again, the idea behind it, the idea that God is watching, that we need to pay attention to how we lead our lives and how we act, I think that those are very important lessons, and that's why those prayers remain.
And those should be all year, not just on Yom Kippur. I mean, that's the biggest reminder, but this has
Absolutely.
to be.
And that final line, utshuva, utzvila, utzdaka, ma'avirin et roa hagzera, that repentance, prayer, and tzedakah can temper judgment's fair decree. But you're right, it doesn't say perform between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rather, that is for the entire year.
I also think the purpose is not only for ourselves, but for the world at large. I mean, if something happens to you, that's a shame, but you didn't do it just for yourself. You did it to enhance the world.
Absolutely. And if we all thought that way, if we all took small steps to help make the world a better place, I think we really could make some good progress.
So,
Rabbi, for those environmentally oriented, go ahead, Bill, I'm sorry.
Rabbi, we go from sort of the heady stuff of the morning and the vidui to much more formulaic explanation of the high priest's performance in the temple on the Day of Atonement. How do we Reform Jews relate to all of that stuff, the formulaic and who dresses and when they do and what they bless, and how do we relate to that?
So, one of my favorite parts of the Avodah section of the afternoon service is it takes us back in time, and we read about what Yom Kippur was like in the days of the high priests and offerings there in the Holy Temple. We read that first the high priest would ask for forgiveness for himself because he couldn't do his job if he hadn't done that first. And then the priests asked for forgiveness for all of the priests, all of the Kohanim, and then asked forgiveness for the people. Part of that that there is a process to repentance. For our ancestors, again, there was more of an emphasis on offering as opposed to prayer. The people brought their sin and guilt offerings on a regular basis to the Mishkan and then to the temple to ask for forgiveness, and they needed the help of the priests to make those offerings happen. That's not the way things work with us, but there's still a process, this idea of admitting our sins, admitting to ourselves that we're not perfect, the idea of wanting to do better, seeking forgiveness from those we've hurt and seeking forgiveness from God, and then turning from our mistakes so that we don't make the same ones again. That's a process, just as for our ancestors, the process included an offering. For us, it's this process through prayer and repentance that hopefully get us to the same place, this idea of not schlepping those sins with us into the new year, but rather turning from them, letting go of them, learning from them, and not making the same mistakes when given that opportunity in the new year. I love the drama of that scene with the high priest. And again, the whole people would have been gathered. They understood that this was the holiest day of the year. The high priest, dressed in robes, would enter the Holy of Holies on this day. People felt probably closer to God at that moment than at any other point during the entire year. And again, I hope that some of that does translate to our Yom Kippur observances of this day. This idea of coming together as a community, we're all in this together, and this idea of feeling close to God. I hope that that does come through here on Yom Kippur.
Rabbi, those prayers that were flagged as being for the 21st century or oriented around the environment, and the section that followed on the heels of that, listing all the good things that we had done and so forth. I don't remember that from last year. Are those brand new additions? I mean, I think the environmental piece is really good. I was a little bit nonplussed about us reminding ourselves that we did something right during Yom Kippur.
I think it's important. So first of all, those are gray pages, and in our machzor, anything in gray means it's either an alternative or additional reading. A lot of the older prayer books, yes, didn't have that reading or only at the very end of the day. But I like this idea that, again, we have to be honest with ourselves. And you're right. I don't think I read either of those last year. Every year I play with the readings a little bit, meaning it's always my goal that this year's Yom Kippur morning service shouldn't be the exact same as last year's, because I'm not the same. None of us are the exact same. And certain readings will jump out at me a little bit more as I plan services each and every year. But this idea, again, in the month of Elul, as we start to do our cheshbon hanefesh, our accounting of the soul, I believe that too often people immediately go to all the things they did wrong. And sometimes we need to stop and remember, you know what? I also did a lot of right things this past year. There's actually a lot that I did well and that I'm proud of this past year. And where we don't want to take the sins with us into the new year, we do want to remember all that we did right and build on that. We want to turn from our mistakes, but we want to build on all those wonderful things that we did and have them continue to inspire us in the new year. So it's there in our Slichot service. It's here. It'll be here again at the end of the day too. A reminder of, hey, folks, let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest about the bad, but at the same time, let's be fair and let's be honest about the good as well. And I think that that's very important. I know what you mean, Peter. It does feel a little strange. And I also like the fact that, the traditional Hebrew of the Vidui, the Ashamnu, Baganu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu, Dofi, it's all in alphabetical order. And I like the fact that Vidui for the environment, they kept that acrostic going in the English. I thought that was well done.
Rabbi, I was just thinking, I didn't know anything about Elul and these practices until I joined a congregation about 30 years ago in Washington. And I started practicing that. And I just had so much to feel that I needed to repent for and everything then. But I find that the practice over these 30 years of observing internally the month of Elul and seriously apologizing to people who would accept the apology graciously or just apologize in my own mind to not do things to them. Or I find that over the years, I have changed a lot in my behavior towards others. And I think the practice is what does it over a long period of time. You can't just do it, between Elul and Yom Kippur.
I agree. It takes work, first of all, and it takes practice. And the more we get into it, the more we put into our holiday preparations, the more we're going to get out of them as well. The more honest we are with ourselves, the more reflection we put into our year in review, the more we're going to get out of our high holy days. Thank you, Jim.
Rabbi, it's also that we have to carry the consciousness all through the year. And as you said, just repenting on Yom Kippur is not going to do it for you. I mean, it's just, and also if there's a passive action and then the active, which is the real action. Passive behavior is just saying words, just, technically going through the guard, right?
Right.
But actually acting on it through the year, catching yourself in consciousness when oops, did I really say that? Did I really do that? That's not what most people are in tune with. They're not aware of that's what this is about too.
Right. And building on that, there's a tradition that we recite the Shema before we go to sleep at night. But part of Kriyat Shema al Amitah, the recitation of the Shema before going to sleep, there's also a passage in there where we review the day and ask for forgiveness for anything that happened during that day, as if, again, in case we don't wake up in the morning, let's clear that out the best that we can. So yes, the idea of seeking forgiveness and forgiving others should not be a once a year activity. Absolutely.
When you
This
first
makes me
start-
remind me of my experience. I'm sorry, Jen. It's the experience when I was in Christianity. The prayers for forgiveness are once every 7 days, and that made it seem kind of bland and formulaic, and it was hard to take it seriously. When I started doing Yom Kippur services after converting to Judaism, the litany actually, and it's the fact that it's such a long, involved, deep thought process, and the fact that you had to try to repent to living people made me take it much more seriously than if I'd been just rattling off a phrase every week. And I when I was a Roman Catholic, I did hear someone verbalize the sentiment. They had just done something. They'd been like a jackass to somebody in a Mardi Gras parade crowd, and that person said, "Oh well, I'll just go take care of it in confession," and just blew off the fact that they'd done something, jerky.
Well, we have that in our tradition as well. As we read in the Talmud, it says, if you commit a sin right before Yom Kippur and say, it's all right, I got Yom Kippur coming, I'm covered. The rabbis wanted to be sure. No, you don't. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, but every week they have the little Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur escape hatch every week, right?
Right.
Ours only comes once a year.
Right. Kurt, did I see you there?
Yes, I'm here. I agree 100% as a Catholic. And well, anyway, that's still better than confessing to a priest.
Well, and again, every faith has its tradition of confession. Because when you confess, it forces you to think about your actions and to admit that you're not perfect and that you've made mistakes and you have to do something about it. So every faith has that within it. I'm good. Other thoughts and questions?
I think when you first start taking it seriously, at least this was my experience, I felt for the first time in years profound shame when I was realizing what some of my habits and some of my interactions, how I did them. And that was very painful. But I think that I've learned that that's a good thing when it happens to you. Because if you feel really ashamed, then you're actually, and you're acknowledging it, that makes it easier to do the work.
Sure. It's not easy to admit that we make mistakes. It's not easy to admit that we're not perfect. But here's one way to make it a little bit easier. God knows we're not perfect. God didn't create us to be perfect. That's not God's expectation of us, so maybe it shouldn't be our expectation either. And I want to be sure I have a chance to wish Lori Freeling. I'm glad that you're here with us, and I want to wish you a Shana Tova. I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay. I'm glad that you're here with us. All right. Other thoughts, questions?
Can I ask one more thing? And I think we've gone over it over the time that we've done Torah study. I bring up this idea of humility a lot because I believe that humility is not a weakness and is not something negative, and we shouldn't be cast down for being humble. Humility is an elevated vibrational way of being and spiritual. And so when we're talking during Yom Kippur about humility, and I feel that it's in a negative connotation sometimes, and am I taking it wrong, or are the words just not really the idea of what I know humility to be?
Humility is a very important part of Judaism. I mean, one of the names for Moses is God's humble servant. And so we are commanded to be like Moses in that way. I'm trying to think, I'd have to look in the liturgy specifically, but I can't think of humility as being presented as a negative or as something wrong. I think rather
A weakness, of being a weakness,
No,
that we are not humble because we are weak. But
I see. No, it
not
shouldn't
that.
come off that way. Let me put it that way, meaning humility is something that we should strive for. And it actually makes us stronger. Again, this acknowledging that we're not perfect, that we're not better than everyone else, that's just not who we are. We should try to be the best who we can be, but that's about it.
Is that something about walking humbly, show mercy, walking humbly, and all that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God.
That's the one.
Yeah, the prophets knew what they were talking about. Other thoughts? Questions about Yom Kippur? A reminder for those who are fasting, I try to make this a reminder every year. The purpose of fasting is not to make oneself sick. And it's warm, it's humid. If you're not feeling well, you shouldn't be fasting. And anyone who takes medicine, anyone who can't fast, again, for lots of medical reasons or pregnancy or diabetes, long list. But those who shouldn't fast on Yom Kippur. It would actually be considered a chet, a sin, a mistake on Yom Kippur. How many people have seen someone faint at the high holy days on Yom Kippur?
At Temple Sinai?
In general, it happens at
Temple Sinai.
It happens in synagogues across the country. Of course, it gives people the opportunity to say, "Excuse me, is there a doctor in the house?" But we don't want that to happen. So again, if you're not feeling well, it's better to eat and be able to move forward. And I know people for whom fasting is very difficult, and they hit that point of the day where they can't think of anything else. Well, then again, your fasting at that point, I fear, is getting in your way, and perhaps you should have something to eat or drink.
So can I say something about the fasting? A lot of people are not used to fasting. I happen to fast a lot, like on a regular basis, and I'm used to not eating. But the not drinking, the not hydrating is a harder thing, I think, for a lot of people to not hydrate, because of course your throat gets dry, your tongue gets dry, but the brainstem needs to be hydrated in order for you to continually think and to process. So, I mean, personally, I think that's a more dangerous thing than not having solid food for only 24 hours. Because then people get lightheaded, they get headachy, they get faint, they get dizzy because they're not hydrated more so than they're not eating. But the idea of the stomach cravings and stuff, you can get through that. It's only one day generally. But a lot of people they're not fasting because they never really fast except one day a year. If you practice, you work up to it. It becomes very easy, except for the hydration, which I have to say that I'm hydrating today because I'm not going to get a headache and get sick and dizzy.
Right, which would then take away from your Yom Kippur. And though this year, again, with all of us spending time at home on this day, the hardest place to fast is at home. So I know that for many people, this will be a harder fast because we are at home. Before we turn our attention to halfway across the globe, I want to, any other thoughts or questions, anything you want to share about Yom Kippur? Yes, Brian, I see you.
I was just thinking, I mean, I remember in one of our tour studies talking about the letter of the law versus the lesson of the law. And I think that's true of fasting too. I mean, you can think about what is the meaning of the fast? Why are we doing it? You know, even if you're not doing it, you can think about the message of it and what's the meaning of it.
Absolutely. When I teach the confirmation class about Yom Kippur, when I talk about fasting, I want them to understand there are a lot of reasons for it. First of all, it makes the day stand out, separate from the rest of the year in many ways. We fast to show that we're serious, but we also fast to show that we have some control over our physical selves. And fasting takes some self-discipline, which is what we're going to need in the new year, not to make all the same mistakes that we made this past year. But there's another side to fasting as well, and that's this idea of empathy, that empathy is stronger than sympathy. So when we remember what it's like to be hungry, there's a better chance that we're going to do something to help keep someone else from feeling that same way. So fasting.
Summary of the lesson. Thank you.
Terry, I see you.
Yes.
Anatava.
Yes, thank you. Finally made it back. Okay. In antiquity, meaning during the the times that we think of as the times of the prophets and so forth, fasting was always associated with mourning, mourning. And then feasting was always associated with joy and celebration. And we have a passage which I think is in Zechariah, I believe is where it is, that says all of your fast days will be turned into feast days. And it gives a list of the fast days. And I think that's somewhere about the middle of Zechariah. Okay, it's been a while since I've read that. And so in thinking about Yom Kippur, it seems like that these holidays are linked. And Sukkot is the festive day that follows Yom Kippur, which is the mourning day. So it's like Sukkot makes that conversion of where the fasting is converted to feasting. And so I just thought that's kind of my idea about it.
I love it. Absolutely. And it's not a coincidence that Sukkot immediately follows, and that the feeling of Sukkot. Here we have these 10 days of repentance at the beginning of the year, but we're going to end this afternoon on a triumphant note. This idea that, you know what, if I've done everything that I can, then I'm going to conclude Yom Kippur positively on that high note. And that's going to continue, so that 5 days later, when I hit Sukkot, it is actually our most festive of holidays. And we are giving thanks for all of our blessings and really celebrating. Twice we're told you have to celebrate Sukkot. No other holiday is described that way. In the Talmud, it's known as Hechag, simply the festival. And it is supposed to balance these feelings at the beginning of the year. And yes, this idea of turning our fasting days to feasting are more, those who sow in tears will reap in joy. That is very much an important idea for us. And again, Yom Kippur should open our eyes to how we look at lots of things. So I like that, Terry. Thank you.
Isn't there a pun in Yom Kippurim?
Right. So that what if it's not just Yom Kippur, it's also known as Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. And if you look at Kippurim, if you change the vowels a little bit, you get Kippurim, a day like Purim, which is, of course, fun and mischievous, but it also celebrates our survival. And that's one of the connections between the two holidays, is that we're celebrating our survival. Good. Lori.
I have a question regarding forgiveness. I was under the impression that, during the days of awe, we ask for forgiveness for our actual actions or for inadvertent actions that we might have harmed other people. But what if they're not responsive? I'm under the impression that we are to try at least 3 times, and then after that, it goes to God.
Well, there's
Do you need to keep trying it the 3 times for the same, maybe a little stiff-necked folk?
So Lori's absolutely right. This idea of we have to focus on what we can control. So what we can control is the asking of forgiveness and the granting of forgiveness. We can be sure that we ask forgiveness, but when we've hurt someone, we're still dependent on them. We want to do everything that we can and then go to God to be able to say, I think I've done everything that I can. I have sincerely sought forgiveness. I've tried to forgive those whom I can forgive. And now, God, I approach you and ask for your forgiveness. Sometimes that's the best that we can do. And sometimes we're not fully ready to forgive. And I understand that. But we also have to be careful of what we're dragging with us into the new year. And whenever we can forgive in order to move forward, I think it's good to give it a shot.
Isn't there a requirement of the person who's being asked forgiveness to accept it?
That's the idea. But again, we know that it doesn't always work that way.
Mitzvah gerera mitzvah. I mean, that's part of the obligation of the other side.
Right. It's in everyone's best interest to be forgiving at this time, but not everyone's there for a variety of reasons.
I once apologized to my mother for things, and she looked at me like, and then she got really angry at me. all over again. For the same thing, because she had kind of repressed it.
Right, right. Or I thought you were going to say because she had forgotten about them, and now that you've reminded her of them, she was doing it all over again. Other thoughts and questions?
Some things just not forgivable is a big question in Judaism because of, you know, the commandments and because of what we are doing right now and discussing these, the more consequential and deepest of indiscretions that we're supposed to forgive for, are some are just not forgivable.
I think so. But again, I think that most of what we're asking forgiveness are not the mortal sins. They are not. This is the things that we can control. Yes, some things are very hard to forgive. But again, the idea here, let's forgive what we can forgive because it's good for us. Let's control what we can control so that we can move forward. Because Judaism does focus, especially here at this time of year, of moving forward. So our goal is for 5782 to be the best year it can be. And we have the best potential by reviewing the past year, taking care of any loose ends, taking care of all of that from the past year, not dragging it with us, learning from our mistakes, building on our successes. That's the idea.
Right, but every year, if there is the certain things that are really not forgivable, what do we do with that? At what point do we, you know, because we do drag those things, that some of these things that maybe aren't even as heavy, but what do we do with those and how do we process that? And it's not just what happened last year, but maybe it happened 10 years ago and we've never worked through it. What do we do with that then?
We find ways. If it's something that someone did to us, then we have to find ways that we can move forward. And again, not focus on the other person, but focusing on ourselves. What do I need to do? I can't fully forgive that person, but what can I do to move forward? Again, we have to focus.
There's also the expression that people I've heard, you know, I will forgive you, but I won't forget.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a balancing of it, you know, in some way.
I think it's good advice. And because the two are not the same. Good. All right. I want to be sure that we have some time to talk about Israel, because there are always lots of things going on in Israel. And isn't it nice, Bill, that we always have so many different things that we could focus on when it comes to the land of Israel? So Bill, I know, has prepared a number of things, but we also wanted to ask, when it comes to Israel, anything particular on your mind or questions that you'd love for us to talk about a little bit today? Sharon.
I know for me, my knowledge of the history of Israel is very scant. So if I could get a recommendation on a basic history to get me started so that the rest of it can all be put in context, that would be super.
For modern Israel or for all of Israel?
Modern Israel.
Okay. All right. So let's think about that for a while. That's a good question, Sharon. You got me thinking. Let's come back to that. Bill, what's on your mind with Israel today?
Well, Rabbi, I was going to pick up actually from a line in last night's Vidui, which one of the things we were going to not do, I guess, is forget about Zion. And I thought you stuck that in there just for this workshop this afternoon. I know that at least one friend of mine in Rosh Hashanah is watching through Facebook, and so I asked him he could WhatsApp me anytime I and chime in anytime I make a mistake. So at least one. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Israel and also what's going on in the reform movement, both in Israel and around the world. It's, you know, this has been a very strange year between tempests and illness and the sense of the unknown being the only constant in one's life. But, and with Jews, there's always a but. I learned that from Rabbi Tchaikovsky, but all is not lost. To begin with, we're here. Be it on camera or in person, we're here. Not everyone is whole, but if you're here, we're glad you're with us. For the next few minutes, I want to review the year through the lens of what is now being called Reform Zionism, as well as Temple Sinai, and to each of us in our own where we fit in our own scenarios. That'd be the last part of it. So, with regard to Israel, as you know, there's a new government. The government is a very interesting one to begin with. The prime minister's name is Naftali Bennett. He represents about 6 or 7 mandates in the Knesset, the parliament. He is known to be right-wing, sympathetic to the settler community, and defender of the territorial integrity of Israel. You have to remember that we have had 10 years of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud, who were considered to be arch right-wing people. And Bennett used to be the, I believe, director general of the prime minister's office while Netanyahu was prime minister. They had a squabble. He left and he went to the right. The foreign minister is Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid made his reputation as a center-left journalist and TV commentator. He's the architect of this very strange coalition, but now he's staying in the background. He very much wants to be prime minister, and according to the rotation agreement that was on which the coalition is based, he will be prime minister, I believe, after 18 months with Benedict. So, but we'll go the prime ministership, if things all go according to the agreement, will go from the far right to the center left. The defense minister is Benny Gantz, who's a former chief of staff, who would be the equivalent of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff here. He is seen to be right of center. He also got along and then didn't get along with Netanyahu. And all these appellations, the right, left, center, are in Israeli terms, not American terms, and that's just not the same. And you have to sort of go with me there. So there's a large coalition, including for the first time an Arab party, representing, and this whole coalition represents a very broad swath of Israeli society. The Likud, which is a party, but you have to also remember it is a coalition that was formed back in the 1960s or 70s by the late Menachem Begin. And Sharon, there's a whole bunch of history you can learn all over the place. Begin was very important in that. And the Likud came to power in 79 and went out of power, I guess, in 2016, I guess, or just now, 2021. They're now in opposition. Netanyahu remains at its head. And basically what they're doing is making a lot of noise and trying to make life difficult for the coalition. How's the coalition doing? Most of what I read in Israeli and American Anglo-Jewish press is reservedly positive. Nobody is sure how this coalition got formed, is going to stay together, and the unknown factor is the seeming fragility. On the other hand, the country is exhausted after 4 inconclusive and expensive election cycles. Furthermore, as you know, in Louisiana, elected politicians have a propensity for wanting to keep their jobs. And they don't want to go to have elections because that might jeopardize their jobs. So I don't necessarily see elections coming really quickly. And I don't see that anybody has posed, excuse me, an issue that would take the coalition apart. They don't have the intense ultra-Orthodox Haredi branch that was part of Netanyahu's Likud for years and years and years. And so I think that part of it is fairly solid. Our Reform friends are very happy because one of our own, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is the former executive director of both the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism and before that for the Israel Reform Religious Action Center, the IRAC, who's a brilliant young man. I shouldn't say young man. Actually, to me, he's young. I've known him since before he was a rabbi. He is now a member of Knesset, and he's the chair of an important Knesset committee. And true to form, as the committees meet and the Knesset does its work, the ultra-Orthodox get up and walk out and boycott his committee and try and be as disruptive as they can. That's not the Likud, that's the ultra-Orthodox. You just have to remember, they're against him because he's a Reform rabbi. I think that people are saying very good things about the social ministries and the people who've been put in position there from both labor and blue and white, which is that funny centrist coalition that precipitated the whole movement that we have now. And they seem to be sympathetic to the reform movement. There was a very important Supreme Court case 2 or 3 months ago, which upheld reform and conservative conversions and marriages in Israel, which was tremendously a huge step. The rabbis can now perform those, but they can't bury. Well, le'at. I think this bodes well for the movement. Le'at means slowly and slowly in Hebrew. I think this should bode well for the movement. The external threats to the country continue. Hamas, aided by Iran in the south, Hezbollah, aided by Iran in the north, agitators in the territory making minor mayhem from time to time. The U.S. has opened the door. The U.S.'s position, which has been sort of to back away from the Middle East as a major strategic area of interest of ours, has opened the door to China and Russia. They've expanded their relations with Iran and in Syria. And Syria, of course, is also aided by Iran. So this is why we hear from time to time about Israeli raids on Iranian weapon caches in Syria. Vladimir Putin is playing a very interesting game. He jumps into bed with Iran because it's a longtime client of the Russians. They've been doing nuclear technology transfer, since before the turn of the century with the Iranians. And so it's important to them. And at the same time, Putin doesn't want to get in trouble with the Israelis. He's been very, very good about the Jewish communities under his supervision. He's left the issue of the Jews alone in Ukraine. That hasn't become. I mean, there are problems internally there, but that not of Putin's makings. So he has he's in the middle and playing. The Chinese are buying up everything they can buy. I remember driving with some friends from the north through Haifa to Jerusalem, or to Tel Aviv actually one night, and the driver explained to me that the Chinese had bought and were building the port of Haifa, and we didn't know what the implications were going to be for Israel, because the Chinese, they're always going to want their due at some point. And for that remains, that's sort of where we are now, and it remains to be seen. As I said, I haven't seen any major issues come up that are going to break this coalition. I haven't been to Israel in 2 years, and I miss it terribly. I'm also sort of semi-retired from the Zionist politics, so I can't go into too much of what is going on there beyond to say that the chairman of the Jewish Agency executive was elected president, and we think that's a very interesting and good sign too. And one of our people is the deputy chair of the agency, and a conservative guy is a deputy chair of WZO. I haven't heard word one from any of these folks at all. So I'll stop there for right now about Israel, and then I'll go to the reform movement if there are questions.
Well, as Bill is saying, it is a fascinating time in Israel. And I mean, when I think about the current governing coalition, I mean, I still say, you got to be kidding me. I mean, who would have thought that some of these folks would come together? But they came together because it was the only way to get Netanyahu out of power. And that's what united them. And it seems like they are doing a good job of choosing issues that they can unite on and work together on. We'll see. Hopefully that will last, because that's in everyone's best interest. So thank you, Bill.
The atmosphere is a lot less fractious than it was 10 months ago. A lot less fractious. And I think that we hope that bodes for the good.
Our son Shai was in Israel this summer on the nifty summer trip. He had a wonderful time, and for him it was eye-opening in lots of ways. He was glad that he got to see this place that he's been learning about since he was just a little kid, got to see it with his own eyes. And Bill, hasn't been 2 years for me, it's been longer. I was jealous of Shai that he got to be in Israel this summer, and I too would hope to go back to Israel at some point soon. Maybe we'll even see if we can get folks together for a congregational trip to Israel. It's been a while since Temple Sinai has had one. If folks are interested, keep it in mind. It takes time to plan, but I'd love for us to see if we can make something like that happen in the not so distant future.
6 weeks, 6 weeks.
As far as COVID in Israel, Bill, what's the latest?
I stayed away from COVID in Israel because I really don't know, Rabbi. I
neither.
hear that the numbers are up, but I hear that the boosters are up. My friend Danny said he got a booster, and I don't know that I don't think there's been the breakthroughs, but the numbers from what I understand, the numbers are up.
Well, in Israel was as the vaccines came out, Israel was the most vaccinated country in the world at one point. Israel knows how to mobilize, and people understood and they moved forward. It was nice.
Yeah, but they also know how to party. And so as soon as they thought they were mobilized and safe, they went out and partied and it blew the thing up again.
Right. Right. Which is why when Shai left for the trip, we didn't pack enough masks for him, because when we were packing, there was one rule. And then as soon as he got to Israel, the rules changed and more masks were needed. Questions about Israel, friends? I hope that, and again, I hope that when we talk about Israel, people get a little bit excited, because again, we're not just talking about any country, we're talking about our homeland. And we should always have that sense of connection.
So I have a question.
Mitch, it's good to hear from you.
What's the new government's, what's their whole take on the, elephant in the room problem?
Which elephant in the room problem?
Well, the fact that they're still occupying other people's land or whatever. I don't like to say it that way when we get on these calls.
Well, go ahead. Now, Mitch, lay your feelings out on the table. Don't use code words. Come on.
I'm just saying, is there going to be I'm not trying to debate the merits of that or not. I'm really just trying to understand what they're going to do going forward, because it just seems like it's still a huge issue.
Latest thing I saw was Yair Lapid. Well, look, first of all, you have the Abraham Accords that have gone into effect. You have the trade that's going on with the Arab countries that's gone into effect. A lot of those Arab countries have isolated the Palestinians over the years. So the Palestinians are in a very, very bizarre place. I saw a piece a couple of days ago, I think, in Haaretz or the Post, the Jerusalem Post, that Yair Lapid is trying to offer some kind of package to Hamas to increase their economic well-being in Gaza. I think this has been tried before with very, very poor results. That's not their interest. Their interest isn't in improving their lives. Their interest is in getting rid of us. And I don't know how you're going to resolve that. And then go ahead, Rabbi.
And let me just add to that. Part of what makes it a little complicated for right now, Mitch, is that within the government are folks who support a two-state solution and folks who do not support that. But everyone wants to move forward here. But I think they're trying to figure out where can we agree and move forward together, whilst trying to develop relationships with partners so that we can have real conversations about moving forward. And that's never been easy.
And then you have people from the outside who have all kinds of solutions. The Biden administration is taking some very firm steps that get some people upset about opening consulates in Jerusalem for Palestinians and trying to tell Bennett what to do with settlements and things like that. So the United States is a player as well.
Absolutely. Brian, I saw that you wanted to get into.
I feel like the only place that I see real Palestinian Israeli connection is through grassroots organizations, where it's more of a people to people thing. And because Hamas is not a good partner. And, I think what I've seen that has been somewhat working, or at least moving in the right direction, is a lot of organizations that are doing people to people, young people to young people, camps that involve Palestinians and Israelis, a listening and understanding kind of thing. And so I've been very supportive of that. And there was recently a legislation that was passed that the US committed 250 million to the Nita Lowry Act, which is supporting grassroots. This money is going to go to support these kind of grassroots efforts. And the model is basically Northern Ireland and how that piece was made. And so there's a lot of countries that are contributing to this fund. US has promised 250 million to try to reach that kind of peace between the people.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's where I see hope, actually.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
And I would tell you, it's very misguided. I would tell you that the
But before
analogy
you
doesn't
say
work.
that, Bill,
Why is it misguided, Bill?
but
Well,
I want to be clear. The only way that there will be peace in the region is when everyone agrees we can't continue this way and that we're going to find a way to work together. And that's where those grassroots, where people learn that they actually have more in common than they thought, where everyone has similar goals for the future. And when it comes to quality of life, when people start focusing more on those issues, that's what's going to get us to how can we be good neighbors and how can we move forward.
And I would say it's misguided because the construct isn't right. Between the analogy isn't right. England and Northern Ireland were two Christian countries. That was a Christian internecine squabble.
It was Protestants and Catholics, and that was no picnic
they're both
either.
Christians, but they're both Christians.
Yeah, but they don't always agree on that.
I understand that, but at the same time, there is at fundament, basoph, they come from the same place. We and the Arabs don't come from the same place.
We're all human beings, so I mean, it's.
Yeah, I understand all that.
Welcome the stranger, all this stuff about, I don't know. I don't feel like, I feel like, I am Jewish and I am not against Israel, but I feel like you just have to see the humanity beyond yourself.
I don't disagree for a second, but at the same time, I think you have to go on a Hadassah tour and see for yourself, because
honey, I just read Henrietta Zoll's new biography, and let me tell you, I feel like she is on my side.
It's not the same thing. To go and to see and to walk and to talk to the people and sit in the cafes, you get a completely different impression of what's going on.
Well,
and it's hard.
But part of what we need here are strong leaders on both sides who are committed to moving forward. And this is where, again, we need stronger Palestinian voices who can stand up to the extremists and say, we need to sit down, we need to work on this together. And
or the Arab countries could do that as well. The Palestinians don't seem to be able to do it for themselves. You have
don't want to deal with the Palestinians.
Yeah, Abbas is in the 16 or 4-year term.
Abraham Accords, I don't think they're the Palestinians. They just
well, because they abandoned them long ago.
I mean,
but again, they have much in common, and when people quit using especially the Palestinians as pawns, even their own leaders, again, when the people when they have leaders who care about the people, that's what we've been searching for, I think, as far as the Palestinian leaders, and that's what we're going to need. But hopefully, again, those who are growing up as a part of some of these movements and conversations with a focus on the future, hopefully they will grow up and say, it's time for us to take things in a different direction.
Their textbooks belie all that. As you know, Terry, what did you want to say? Sorry, you got a big problem there, Rabbi. Huge traffic bump. Sorry, go ahead, Terry.
Okay, I was going to say that what I see in the present coalition is that at the moment Israel is defining itself, and the reason I say that is, had the Netanyahu government been reelected all over again, then he would have had a lot of the ultra right-wing people that was holding his coalition together, and people like Smotrich and United Torah Judaism would have shifted the country in such a way that the buses couldn't run on Shabbat. And the question is, do we have a modern state that follows that kind of a rigid prescription. And I don't think it is workable for Israel to do that. And so in many respects, I was happy to see Naftali Bennett become the prime minister. And he has a group of Arabs with him. They only have 5 Knesset seats. But one of the things that holds this coalition together is that Bennett must extend the olive branch to the Palestinians. And as you said, that's what he's doing with the extension of some kind of economic help to Hamas. And the problem is that it's very difficult to do this. As far as I'm concerned, a Palestinian state on the West Bank is not an option. It would become another Gaza Strip, and it would be a devastating thing for Israel for this to happen. So there must be a way of bringing these people under the umbrella of Israel. And of course, they could certainly have their own local governments and so forth, just like, Phoenix has its own local government, even though it's inside the United States. But what I'm saying is that if we can, this coalition can hold itself together and extend some kind of an olive branch and try to improve the lives of the Palestinians, and at the same time realize that all this area is Israel, then I think that would be the best way for Israel to define itself. And we know that Naftali Bennett is committed to continuing the settlements and so forth. However, we can't do this and not allow the Palestinians to have their homes and their structures and their local governments as well. That's just my assessment of the situation.
Well, and I think that we're still figuring out what's going to work best. I do believe in a 2-state solution. I think there has to be a way to make that happen. We're not going to solve all of that now. But again, I like to try to be an optimist when thinking about Israel. I always believe that there is a way. We will get there. And I do believe that. I think that we get closer. I think that the current government is doing a little bit of walking on eggshells as they're trying to figure out how they can proceed, because there is a desire, as Bill said, to keep that government together and not go through this again. Everything's a work in progress, no question about it. Friends,
sorry, just understand, please, it's not the elephant in the room for the Israelis. This is not the central topic of discussion at dinner in anybody's restaurant, except maybe places in the foreign ministry. They're not concerned about it, which is probably both good and very disturbing to the American point of view. It's not they're ignoring these people at all. It's just the Arabs are in a position where they're so, I guess, almost tongue-tied by themselves, by their own people, that they have their standing has been lost. And I don't think the Israelis, and I don't think the Jewish people think that it's our job to lift them up because their people won't do it. I just don't believe that.
I'm going to have to sign off so I can rest my voice to make it through the rest of today. I want to wish you welcome. If you're willing to stick around for a little bit.
I have some more stuff. But
I'm going to turn things over, but I want to wish everyone a Shana Tova, Gemar Chatzima Tova. Again, our schedule for today, we do need to conclude before 2:00 because we're going to invite everyone to all of our families, we couldn't really do a family service this year. So we're inviting families to join us at 2:00. At 3:00 will be our afternoon service, and we will take a closer look at the book of Jonah. And our service will also contain a healing service as we pray for all of those who are in need of healing, especially this year with everything that's going on. Our Yizkor service will begin around 4:30 as we remember all of those whom we've loved and lost over the years, and especially remember those who died in 5781. And then we'll move right into our Ne'ilah service around 5:15 and conclude our day around 6:00. Again, I want to thank you everyone for being with us. I'm going to sign off, but you're welcome to stick around. Shana Tova, Gemar Chatzima Tova.
Thanks. You, Rabbi. Stay with us for just for the next 3 minutes. You don't have to say anything. I just want you to listen to what I'm going to do, okay? This is a very quick, I want to give you a quick review of the leadership, the sea change and the leadership changes that are reflecting that are reflective of the time and the generations in the reform movement. The impact of women in leadership has been very strong, and I happened to go through it. Every institution in the reform movement, with the obvious exception of the Men of Reform Judaism, has a woman in a top leadership role, either lay or either professional, clergy, or lay. The URJ, Rabbi Rick Jacobs is president, Jennifer Kaufman is chair, the second woman in a row. HUCJIR, our seminary, the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Dr. Andrew Rehfeld is the new president now after 2 years, and Sue Hochberg is chair, and she's been there for a while. At the Central Conference of American Rabbis, Rabbi Louis Kamras, who's a mentee of Rabbi Cohen, believe it or not, he is president, and Hara Person is the executive director, and she's been the editor of the review for a long, long time, and a wonderful person. The American Conference of Cantors, Rabbi Cantor Coleman's organization, Rachel Roth is the COO, and Cantor Claire Franco is president. The World Union for Progressive Judaism, where we are mourning the tragic loss of Rabbi Dick Hirsch, who is just a huge mentor for everybody. Rabbi Sergio Bergman from Argentina has been elected president, and Carol Sterling from Canada remains the chair. In the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, I mentioned that Rabbi Gilad Kariv has gone to the Knesset, so Anna Kizlansky will succeed him as executive director, as managing director, and Yair Lutstein from Kol HaNeshama Jerusalem is the chair. At Artseinu, which is our umbrella Zionist organization, Dekel Humash is the executive director, and Rabbi Leah Milstein from London is the chair. At the Israel Religious Action Center, Orly Erez Lichovsky is the new director. And at the Women of Reform Judaism, obviously, Rabbi Marla Feldman is CEO, and Sarah Charney from Canada, another first, is the president. And even here at Temple Sinai, you remember, Ellen Cohen is a woman, and she is the second in a row, after Tracy, and the clergy remain men. What all this means for the future of the movement, I think that is remains to be seen. And I wanted to sort of put that out there because I think it reflects a very strong change in at least the reform movement. And Terry, you were talking about Israel defining itself. I think this is going to go a long way for the reform movement to define itself. And I don't know if you have comments about that. Brian and Verdi and other people in the reform involved with WRJ and Sharon. I'll let that one sit for a minute. Anybody want to respond to it?
I mean, it's a good sign. Some balance.
Why?
Some balance. I think balance. That's the best way I can put it. I don't want to.
Right.
Glad to hear all the women's names.
Sorry?
Glad to hear women's names.
Yeah.
You listen.
You're breaking up, Brian. I'm not hearing you all clearly.
I just said glad to hear the women. Yeah.
Yes, I think it was really sort of, it was important.
Yeah.
All right. So my last part is a little bit different. My last part is a personal Jewish calculus. It's part of the Cheshbon HaNefesh, this accounting of ourselves to our souls. Sorry?
I have to go.
All right, Brian.
I'm going to shul in California now.
Tell Marcy hello.
I will.
Okay, Shana Tova. In the swirling mix of intersectionality and multiculturalism, in describing yourself as where does the Jew in you rank? Is the top of the list, somewhere in the middle, toward the bottom? Are you an American Jew? Are you a Jewish American? What other attributes do you list? Residence, education, professional position, family, legacy, hobbies, interests, and ambitions. If your Jewish self is not at the top, what can we at Temple Sinai do to help you pull it up there? And what can you do to assist the effort? And I really ask because I'm worried that our Anti-Semitism is rising, as we know. It's particularly bad in Europe, Eastern Europe, but it comes here as well. For us to do something about it, for us to combat anti-Semitism, to me, I think it's important for one to know who you are, for what you stand, and where your red lines are as a Jew. We're 75 years from the liberation of Auschwitz and 80 years after the massacre at Babi Yar. Yet a huge majority of millennials don't know anything about the Shoah. Then they can't tell you what Auschwitz was or where it was. And most probably have little or no contact with Jews. And they still learn to be leery about us, if not worse. So how do we equip our youth to know their Jewish selves and to be able to stand up for themselves? Those were my questions to you, but I'm interested in people, how you describe yourself and where Jewish comes in on your list. Janice.
Okay. To me, it's literally my DNA. I feel a strong connection to the Jewish people and to my education in Judaism. All of that, it is who I am. However, I have a hard time defining it outside of that. I mean, it's kind of like being female. I mean, it's just what I am.
Right, but if somebody asks you who you are, where does being a Jew come in? Who are you? Are you a female? You live in New Orleans. You have education. You work in the Pentagon, and you're Jewish, and you're a member of Temple Sinai, and a bunch of other things. Where does all that sort of winnow out?
I can't verbalize it.
Okay, all right.
It's like saying, I mean, like I speak English. That's my native language. It is who I am. It's a deep part of who I am. But I'm not a very flamboyant or out there, Jew. I mean, I'm not I've told you this, I believe in being Jewish in all of my actions and in all of my interactions with other people using Jewish values. But I don't belong to many organizations and I'm not really political. I have, as far as Israel is concerned, I don't know enough about, I shouldn't say what I think about that because it's not kosher to me. Should I say it?
Sure. There's no non-kosher about this.
I mean, I find, no, I can't say this, everybody will hate me. Okay, if I made an analogy between white supremacy in the United States and the assumption that this country belongs to them and that everybody else has to be, roped out of the mainstream. Okay. I see that, I see some analogies there to how people who are not Jewish, I don't even know the difference between an Arab, a Muslim, or a Palestinian. But one thing that really interested me was I read that in genetic analyses, Palestinians have the DNA of every group that has ever lived there, including Jews. They have Roman, Italian, they have Arab, they have people from the Middle East. They are rooted there too, and nation states are a construct, and I don't know, but like I say, I'm not that involved in it, but it bothers me a lot to hear the us and them kind of attitudes toward that. Like you were saying, that Israelis really don't care what happened.
That's not, I didn't say that. No, it's not. I didn't say that. It's not they don't care.
What did you say?
I said it's not the center of the conversation. It's not that they don't care.
Okay.
But there's not a whole lot they can do about it except defend themselves from attack. The Palestinians have made it clear that they don't want to deal with the Israelis.
Was there
They
a
don't want to deal
difference
with the Jews.
between terrorists who are actively terrorists and the people who just live there and live their lives?
Sure.
But you're talking about they're fighting the political groups that are hostile to Israel, like the Hamas and the
I think we make the mistake of thinking that the Arab street really has an opinion, because in America the street does have an opinion, and in the Arab world I don't think the street has very much of an opinion at all, and it's very top down, and it's what the head of the group says is going to be, and that's what's going to be. There's not a lot of question there, and you know, I love the idea that we apply some of our concepts to the situation. I have not seen them work in the last 40 years. Confidence building measures and economic development measures, and even some of the camps that Brian was talking about, you know, a lot of times those kids grow up and they either get co-opted when they get to 6th grade and start reading the textbooks, or they get killed, or they volunteer to be martyrs. I mean, it's not a very pretty situation. And anybody who's been through the military can also tell you a lot more stories than I ever can. It's not a very decent situation. Nobody talks about Jordan as a possible, overseer, because they signed off in '67. They said we don't want anything to do with it. Well, what else is there? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to pick up the garbage? Who's going to provide water? Who's going to provide electricity? Who's going to give them the tax money? It's all on the Israelis. They're doing all of that. So what is it people want the Jews to do to help the Palestinians? It's, you know.
I don't even understand who the Palestinians are as opposed to it's not a tribe.
They're trying to establish themselves. They're trying to establish themselves using our narrative as some kind of national polity.
Palestinianism?
Yeah. Yeah, they talk about diaspora, they talk about massacre, they talk about Holocaust, you know, all this stuff. How they were driven from the land in the 40s, and there was this hope of the right of return, and these millions of refugees should come back to houses that they supposedly had in peace state Israel.
Okay, but I mean, all right, so
go ahead, Mitch.
But there is some truth to people that were driven from their houses, and there is just the reality of what Janice said, which is that, and you know, this is Yom Kippur, right? I mean, at some level, people are just people, and this is not right.
At what level, though, Mitch? Where else? I'm sorry, but from a Jewish level.
Yeah, I know.
Where else are we going to go? Where else are we going to go? And where else who's going to take us in?
I think that there's a better solution than just thinking that it can never be solved.
I don't think I'm not saying it can never be solved, but I'm thinking that we're not thinking as Jews. None of us has been thinking about Jews in this whole discussion. We're all feeling badly for the Palestinians. This is our country. How do we defend it? What does it mean to us? Where is Jew on your list, folks? Because I don't.
First of all, Jew is high on my list, but it doesn't mean that I just blindly support what other Jews are doing all the time. I think, there's some, I understand there's like what Janice said is to me really right. I mean, like the level of, I don't just see, I'm obviously not there, but I don't just see it being like the Palestinians all their fault. I see lots of super, super right-wing hateful stuff coming from Jews.
But it's not blame therapy, and the stuff that you hear, you're jumping to polemics and fringe stuff here.
No, I don't think I am. I see thousands of people at rallies and stuff in Israel. Thousands of people at rallies for anything in Israel is a big deal. And you know, they are not calling for peace, and they are not calling for harmony. Those people that are doing that. And
but the other rallies the next night are.
they are. I'm not saying there are good people in Israel. There's probably most people in Israel are good people. That's not the point. The point I'm making is that the politics that's been driving Israeli policy has been from a position of division and hate, not from a position of how do we figure this out. There isn't the only there is no, you know, this new government doesn't seem to have a real orientation towards, gee, you know, we really actually need to like do a reset here and figure this out. They seem to sort of be like, yeah, we're managing the problem. I mean, it's just, this is too big of a problem to never figure out. And it's also like, at the end of the day, like, you know, is it really like sustainable for Israel to sort of be overseeing a group of people that essentially turns it into like an apartheid state? I just think it's going to get less and less acceptable, and like for that to be the case. I mean, it just, because the numbers keep getting worse. All right, I'll shut up now, but okay. All right.
I consider myself an American citizen first, who has chosen to be a Jew. But as far as being an American citizen, I also have lost faith in this country the past couple months, or since January 6th, or whatever the hell, or since 48% of people, you know, voted for somebody who doesn't seem to understand that when an apple falls from the tree, it hits the ground. And I also happen to think kind of where Janice is coming from, that the whole concept of nation state with boundaries and borders, and that's not to besmirch Israel per se, just the whole grand idea of nation state is starting to become vestigial, right? It's dragging the human race down, that we need to get past that point. But when I'm in conversations with people that inevitably are talking about, it's a shame that people who had done to them these things by the Nazis are now turning around doing the same thing to the Palestinians. You know, I took a leaf from Vern's book and said, okay, so let me, you referenced to me a news story or some piece of evidence that shows where the Israelis are packing Palestinians into boxcars and running them through death camps. And they're like, oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, no, I did, you know, and I try to teach people about the two intifadas and exactly what Yitzhak Rabin meant when he was talking about break their bones and the context of all that stuff. And one thing I like to point out to people is you never hear anymore is the 3-word mantra, right? Bill's gonna have to school me on this. I think it was the Oslo Accords. The big 3-word mantra was land for peace, land for peace, land for peace. Well, we gave the Palestinians land, but we didn't get peace. We got rockets, okay? And I don't believe that being a Jew means you have to support everything that Israel does, right or wrong. I'm opposed to a lot of the policies of Israel. But, you know, a very close friend of mine on some academic stuff, we're in agreement that there's been wrongs on both sides. And I have noticed, I've been paying more attention to this stuff, that only when Israel does wrong does the media seem to pay attention to the whole region of the world, you know. And that's frustrating, you know, but it's
well, you know, my question to you guys is, if you feel so strongly about it, what are you going to do about it? Are you willing to make Aliyah and become an Israeli citizen and defend the state, or are we just going to sit here and be armchair people and talk about it?
I would love to make Aliyah. I don't think the rest of my family would go for it, but I'd like to do it.
I wouldn't talk about it very often, just because I'm only doing it because I'm here today, and that's the topic. But I always feel like we in the United States don't take care of our own house here either. So I certainly don't think that I think Israel probably pays more attention to their minorities than we do here. But I don't think I don't think we have to compare the US with Israel. And it's not an easy solution, but I'm glad you're having this conversation, because that's the only way anything ever happens unless we talk about it. So I'm glad you brought all this up.
But it's only one side. And Sharon, I think you have to remember that Israel is the product of 2,000 years of Jewish history, not 73 years of Jewish history. It's a product of 2,000 years, and working and people going around the world and constantly praying 3 times a day for Jerusalem and to return to Zion. And it's, so Janice, to me, it's not just a nation state. Mitch, it's not just a nation state. It's the Jewish state. And it can be a nation or not a nation, but the Jews need a place where they can go. And the Jews need a place where they can go if something turns on them. And we Jews in the United States need a place to go if God forbid the society turns on us. Because Jewish history says that at some point the society turns against the Jews. It almost did this time in January 6th. Almost. People with Camp Auschwitz t-shirts and stuff like that. We're getting closer. What are we going to do about it?
Can a reformed convert get Israeli citizenship?
Sure.
Okay.
Did not know
If you
this.
convert in the United States, yes. Yeah. Or outside Israel. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good to know.
And Aliyah, I think Aliyah is becoming more and more attractive alternative. I'm glad that the Israelis are letting the groups come in again. Sorry,
What's the
Jeff.
difference between an Arab and a Palestinian? Is it
You
really?
know, there are Christian Palestinians as well as Arab Palestinians.
Okay.
Arab or Muslim?
Same thing.
Okay.
No, I think they're all Arab. They're not all Muslim. They're all Arab, and some are Christian, some are Muslim.
Do any of them ever convert to Judaism?
I'm sure 1 or 2 every once in a while does, but it's very dangerous for them. It's life-threatening for them. Never mind converting. Just getting involved with the Jews is life-threatening for them.
Okay.
What happened to Itzhak?
I see what you're saying.
And we don't take into account in our calculus that they really don't want Jews there. When you boil it all down to the bottom, they say they don't want Jews there. It's not in the settlements. It's in Haifa, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, everywhere. They don't want Jews there, at least not as a majority. And that's not acceptable. We live too long the other way. I know that's not an easy fact to inculcate.
Well, it's great that you bring this up because it makes me think about it, which I rarely do.
No, I'm with the rabbi. I think we should get a trip together. I told him we should. He and I should just go before Shai went. He could write his Yom Kippur sermon on the plane. He wasn't for that. And there's still 4 planes a day out of JFK and one or 2 out of Miami and Los Angeles. LL is still flying.
Do they let us in?
Sure, if you have
Right
tests. Yeah, they'll probably test you at the airport and they test you before you go. But yeah.
By the way, I don't know if this is of interest to anybody, but Oshner Baptist is giving booster shots to seniors, the 3rd one, and it's all walk-in, hardly anybody's there.
Wow, that's good to know. Seniors is what, over 70 or 65? What?
I don't know because I'm so far over. I think it's 65 is usually the thing, but I made an appointment, but anybody can make an appointment. It's not, I mean, it's a public, I mean, it's not a membership thing.
On Napoleon?
So,
Yeah.
Bill, how does this ultimately resolve if there's no resolution?
How do I know that, Mitch? I can't predict the future.
I know, but what's the scenario that the current government or whatever would, if they really went the right way, would be like, what's a possible scenario?
I don't think I don't know. From where I sit, I wouldn't venture a guess, and I because I don't know enough. And I think you have to know a whole lot more about Arab mentality. And because what you have to do is find the common ground and find the common threads. And so far, nobody's leaving them on the ground on the other side. There's no other side to talk with.
Is it primarily religious, Muslim and Jews, or
No.
is It's not.
No, it's Arabs and Israel and Arabs and Jews. They want the Jews out.
Well, that's.
It's more of a land use issue. It's not a religious issue. The Christian historical right likes to paint it as a religious issue. Jews versus Muslims until the Messiah Jesus returns, and at that point, all Jews who have not converted will be wiped out. But no, it's